Human rights activist and UN Special Rapporteur Francesca Albanese has accused the major corporations of complicity in the Gaza crisis. Speaking at this year's Nelson Mandela Annual Lecture in Santon, she highlighted what she calls the systemic oppression of Palestinians. And for reaction, we're joined by Advocate Maurice Hirsch from the Jerusalem Center for Security and Foreign Affairs. Maurice, good afternoon to you, and thank you so much for your time. Now, Francesca Albanese accused the major corporations of being complicit in the Gaza crisis, and this is not an isolated case. There's been many other criticizing corporations in funding Israel, etc. What is your response to these allegations?
So good afternoon, firstly. Thank you for having me. It's incredible to hear that anyone is actually giving any credibility to Francesca Albanese. She is someone who, from day one of her position, has adopted an anti-Israel position, including lies as her platform. For example, she spoke in a conference in the UN in July 2023, before the war had even started, and there she made the outrageous claim that 420,000 Palestinians had been killed in the year prior since she took over her position. Obviously, that was a complete lie. This is something which doesn't have any basis whatsoever. She then builds upon these lies to libel Israel, to make claims that really have no basis whatsoever. She participates in conferences together with Hamas, together with genocidal terrorists, all this even before the October 7 massacre. And then on the October 7, she is one of the first UN, now we're talking about an organization that is meant to be neutral. The UN platform, the UN Charter guarantees neutrality, and yet Francesca Albanese on day one is explaining why Hamas terrorists were justified in massacring Israelis, beheading children, murdering, raping, torturing, because obviously there's a context in which these types of activities are acceptable. Now, I asked you, I understand the background of South Africa. How many times did black South Africans walk around the streets of Pretoria, of Joburg, massacring white people for really the true offenses that were carried out against them? The answer is none, because there is no justification. There is no context in which you can rise up, invade another country, and massacre women, babies, children, and then say, well, it was justified. There is no justification, and anyone who justifies those actions, such as Francesca Albanese, is a supporter of terror and should be really sidelined, ignored, and really put in that really terrible category of vile racists.
Well, I suppose we need to redefine what we mean by genocide, even if you draw onto the apartheid era atrocities and whether black people retaliated, which was expected just from a human perspective. And that did not happen. The fact that there was reconciliation does not mean that there is, or justice has then been implemented. In other words, reparations still need to happen in South Africa for the atrocities of apartheid. And similarly, the people of Palestine have the right to claim back their territory, and things that are happening there, Mr. Hirsch, cannot be denied, in the sense that there has been attacks on the Gaza or the people of Palestine, and that's why you have South Africa and other countries now intervening and saying there is a genocide and the world needs to take notice.
Unfortunately, this is a confusion of two different things entirely. When you're talking about genocide, you're talking about the intentional murder of another population in order to destroy them. That hasn't happened, even if we accept the Hamas numbers, and which are false in their nature because they're presented by a genocidal terrorist organization. You understand that of the people who have died, if you take off the natural deaths in Gaza Strip, there were 13 to 16 people dying every day without any connection to the conflict. So over a 2-year period, we're talking about 15,000 people. If you talk about the people who were being murdered by the terrorists themselves, the El Ahli hospital, for example, where the terrorists themselves bombed, albeit with a misfired rocket, the El Ahli hospital, another couple of hundred people killed. And so we're talking about numbers that don't really fit in with anything. We're talking about the killing of 25,000 terrorists, of those people who were included in the Hamas death numbers. And so we're talking about in a war of really a war that was started by Hamas on October 7, that they are now unfortunately dragging the Gazan population into, that they use as human shields. While Israel was building bomb shelters to defend against the Hamas rockets, Hamas was digging tunnels not to defend the civilian population, but only for their fighters, as their leaders have already said time and time again. This is an unfortunate area that has been taken over by a genocidal terrorist organization. Not Israel is committing a genocide here. It's Hamas that committed the genocide. And so the use of that terminology, the abuse of legal terminology, which has a specific context within the framework of international law, is another one of these crimes of Francesca Albanese. She hasn't claimed that there's been a genocide anywhere else in the world. There wasn't a genocide in the Ukraine when Russia attacked. These are words that she clearly holds only for Israel, only a standard for Jews, and that's what makes her claims inherently racist. They have no broad or wide application as they should have. They are Jew-specific, and that is racism.
All right, again, that's your opinion and not necessarily the reflection of the show or the channel, of which you are entitled to, Mr. Hirsch. And I just very briefly, in your view, the invitation from the Nelson Mandela Foundation of having Francesca there, would you say that they erred based on your views?
I think that any time that you're hosting a vile racist who supports genocidal terrorists as part of the legacy of Nelson Mandela, that is a big mistake. Nelson Mandela's legacy should be reconciliation, should be moving forward, uniting people as people, and no matter who they are. And Francesca Albanese's legacy is diversion, subversion, Jew hatred, and aligning with genocidal terrorists. So I would maybe ask the same question to you. Do you think that that type of a speaker is someone who is reflective of Nelson Mandela's legacy?
Yeah, not having been part of the planning committee, so I'm just going to defer that maybe back to you and your ilk in discussing that, Mr. Hirsch. It's outside of my purview, but thank you again for joining us. That is Advocate Maurice Hirsch from the Jerusalem Center for Security and Foreign Affairs.